I gotta tell you guys, if you own property, especially rural property, you probably value your peace and quiet, right? Your space, your privacy, the right to do what you want on your own land. That's all I ever wanted. I'm Ethan Miller, and this is the story of how a small-town HOA tried to seize my farm, force me to comply with their beige standards, and ultimately sued me for $65,000 because I installed solar panels. Panels I had every legal right to own. It all started on Oak Ridge Farm, just outside what we used to call the county line, but which has now become a sprawl of manicured lawns and identical vinyl siding. We've been here for 3 generations. We're zoned ag. We have our fields, our barn, the farmhouse, chickens, and yeah, a couple of those stubborn goats that view fences less as boundaries and more as a suggestion. Classic farm life, you know? My big move a couple of years back was investing heavily in a state-of-the-art solar array and battery storage system. Electricity costs were killing the operation, and the local utility cooperative had this great rebate program. I did it all by the book, pulled every permit, went through every single inspection, got every municipal sign-off. Everything was locked down. Critically, there was no HOA, this was agriculture. My deed was older than the concrete foundation of that entire subdivision next door. Then came the Meadows at Sterling Heights. It popped up right on the other side of my back fence, pitched as country living with luxury amenities. And they had an HOA, which, honestly, I didn't care about. Not my pool, not my problem. They could argue about acceptable shades of gray all day long. It didn't affect me. But the new residents, they didn't get it. They saw an open field and thought public park. I started finding kids cutting through my hayfield, someone letting their golden retriever, a beautiful dog, but an absolute menace, chase my heritage chickens, and once, a couple setting up a romantic little picnic right next to my main goat enclosure. Like our livestock was some kind of rural ambiance for their date night. I was polite at first, putting up bigger, clearer, no trespassing signs, introducing myself to the closer folks. It helped a little, but you could feel the entitlement bubbling up. The real problem, the kindling for this whole bonfire, was Victor Sterling, the guy whose 2-story McMansion backed directly onto my fence line. He was the kind of guy who introduced himself by proudly stating he was on the board. He came over maybe a month after moving in. All smiles and suggested that my old, functional barn needed a paint job. "Ethan," he said, patting my shoulder like I was a slightly confused nephew. "We're trying to keep the neighborhood cohesive, you know. The architectural guidelines really prefer an earth tone, a muted beige, perhaps. That deep red is a bit jarring." I remember just looking at him, dust on my jeans, and thinking, "You have no idea who you're talking to." "Victor," I replied, maybe a little too dryly. "I'm not in your HOA. This is a working farm, not a community centerpiece. And even if I were to paint it, the goats would probably just eat the paint chips off the weathered wood anyway." He just gave me this tight, condescending smile. "We will see about that, old-timer. We have standards here now." That was the first time I felt that cold, invasive prickle of suburban power tripping. A few months later, I did the solar expansion. 2 extra racks, doubling the battery bank. Again, permits pulled. Inspector signed off, property records updated. I even kept detailed PDF copies of everything, because I learned long ago, if you don't keep your own records, some bureaucracy somewhere will lose the only one that matters. And that's when the letters started. They weren't from the town. They were from some faceless HOA management company I'd never heard of, addressed to me, referencing my parcel ID, but calling my land Lot XYZ. Sterling Heights Phase 2. I checked my deed, checked the county plat map. My land was mine with its own metes and bounds. Zero connection to their subdivision, but the bullet points on those letters. They were aggressive. Architectural review denial. Unapproved solar installation. Violation notice. Non-conforming accessory structure, barn color. Fine assessment. $100 per day until cured. Demand to remove or screen array. And they always finished with some absurdly friendly note about joining their preferred landscaping vendor program. I just laughed and threw them away. Thinking it had to be a clerical error, I did, however, email the management company, politely attaching my deed and saying, I am not and have never been a member of your association. Their reply was boilerplate. Thanks for your email. We will review. 2 weeks later, another letter arrived. The fines were now $400 and counting. When I called the rep, she insisted, "Our records show that your lot is part of the community." When I pushed back, sending the plat map, my deed, a letter from the county recorder, the whole package, I got a week of radio silence, followed by a voicemail from Victor, the president, asking me to come work this out at their next meeting. I told my wife, Sarah, not my circus, not my beige monkeys, and I ignored it. That was my big mistake, guys. Never ignore official paper. Next thing I knew, a stern-faced process server pulled into my driveway and handed me a thick stack of papers. It wasn't a fine anymore. It was an actual, certified lawsuit. The Meadows at Sterling Heights HOA versus Ethan Miller. They demanded an injunction to remove my solar panels and payment for $65,000 in accrued fines and attorney's fees. Sarah came out to the porch looking horrified. "What is it?" she whispered. I remember flipping through the pages, my stomach dropping. "Apparently," I told her, "I joined an HOA and forgot. I knew enough to know you can't ignore a lawsuit." This was going to cost real money, even just to get dismissed. I immediately called a land use attorney, a guy named Mr. Davies, who had a reputation for being absolutely ruthless, but fair. While waiting for his callback, I read the complaint. That's where the blood really started boiling. They had included a copy of their subdivision plat, with a hand-drawn blob encircling their entire development, and a huge chunk of my farm, effectively annexing me on paper. They claimed they had voted in a board meeting to extend community boundaries to align with a utility easement and viewshed. That's not how property law works, you psychos. Worse, they included photos of my solar array taken from behind my fence. One angle clearly suggested whoever took it was standing on my property. I even recognized a muddy boot print near the fence post on the photo. When Mr. Davies called, he was calm, but his words were razor sharp. "They don't have a leg to stand on, Ethan, but we need to treat this carefully. HOAs can be aggressive and drag things out just to bankrupt you." He quoted me a retainer that made my eyes water, but the alternative was losing my farm over a pile of high-voltage vanity. We filed a blistering motion to dismiss based on lack of subject matter jurisdiction. We also preemptively cited the state's anti-SLAPP statute, a law designed to prevent exactly this kind of frivolous lawsuit meant to silence citizens. Mr. Davies wasn't messing around. He copied the county recorder, the planning department, and the state attorney general's Consumer Protection Division on a complaint about unauthorized attempts to enforce covenants on non-member parcels. We were taking this nuclear. The HOA responded with a long, rambling brief full of nonsense about equitable servitudes and harmonious aesthetics, citing a case about a condo owner who painted their balcony neon orange. My farm is not a neon orange condo balcony. Then came the next shockwave. They attached more pictures of my property. One, horrifyingly, was taken from inside my barn. It showed my workbench, the labeling on the high-voltage battery units, and even a calendar with my kid's doctor's appointment visible in the background. Someone had reached through an open window or slipped in a partially open door. My hands were shaking, not just from anger, but from fear. We had high-voltage batteries in there. What if they tried to sabotage them? What if my family was hurt? "We are adding trespass and invasion of privacy to our counterclaims," Mr. Davies confirmed, his voice now steel. The harassment escalated physically. I came home one afternoon to find a laminated, professional-looking stop work order from the Architectural Review Committee posted right on my front gate. And across the street, Victor's crony, some guy named Mark, was sitting in his SUV, filming me with his phone. When I walked up and demanded to know what he was doing, he just smirked. "Documenting." The board instructed me. "Get off my property, Mark," I said. He shot back, "This is a common area for the viewshed, Miller." I simply pointed to the no trespassing sign, stone-faced. "Call the sheriff if you think you're right." He didn't, of course. He just sat there filming. That's when I knew I needed more than just a lawyer. I needed teeth. Act 2. The counterattack. The advice I got from Mr. Davies was solid, document everything, but fight back hard and legally. The first huge win was securing a temporary restraining order, TRO, against the HOA and its named officers, including Victor. We attached the photo of the laminated stop work sign, the threatening texts Victor had sent me earlier, stuff like, "You will find weird standards, and it would be better for everyone if we could blend the view," and stills from my existing trail cam showing two men in polo shirts stepping over my fence line. The judge granted the TRO ex parte for 14 days, pending a full hearing. The sheriff's deputy served Victor personally. "Call us," the deputy told me. "We will enforce it." I slept better than I had in months that night. Next, I hired a professional, licensed surveyor. He came out, pulled the original deeds, and flagged every corner and the exact path of the utility easement with bright orange tape. His reaction when I explained the HOA's annexation claim? "They are absolutely smoking something. Your line is right where your original fence is." That professional plat and staking was gold. We hit the HOA with a certified litigation hold letter, a beautifully stern document demanding they preserve all communications. Texts, videos, and social media posts related to me. My farm, the solar panels, everything. We even CC'd the HOA's directors and officers, D&O insurance carrier. Mr. Davies had tracked them down, saying, "If Victor is going rogue, the insurance company will become your ally, because they hate paying for stupid." A week later, we got the official letter from the power company. The easement allows utility personnel and their contractors access to maintain the lines. It does not create public access and grants no HOA rights. Checkmate on their central argument. But the paranoia was real. Few days later, my trail cam pinged at 2 a.m. It wasn't Victor, but another neighbor. He was wearing a hoodie, standing right next to my barn corridor by the battery door, shining a flashlight into the window. Moments later, the high-voltage alarm inside the battery enclosure chirped, and the camera caught him flinching and running away. That was the moment the emotional vibe shifted from stupid HOA to, "This is unsafe." I called the sheriff. They came out, pulled the footage, and took a report, actually dusting my barn door for prints. The deputy asked if I'd been threatened. I showed him Victor's texts. "Remove the panels or we will escalate." He raised an eyebrow. At the preliminary hearing, the judge was openly skeptical of the HOA's claims. Mr. Davies was calm, methodically presenting the state statute protecting solar installations, the surveyor's plat, the utility letter, and the TRO. The HOA's lawyer fumbled some nonsense about community standards. The judge cut him off, dead serious. "Counsel, show me where the deed for Mr. Miller's parcel references your covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs. Silence. Dead silence. The judge set a date for the full motion to dismiss, and explicitly told the HOA to consider whether they really wanted to spend their members' money on this. On the way out, Victor gave me that tight, sickly smile. I kept my mouth shut. That night, the trail cam pinged again. Same neighbor, Mark from the hoodie incident, but this time with a ladder, trying to look over the fence at the solar panels. I called the sheriff immediately. They rolled up with 2 cars and found Mark at the fence line, ladder in hand. They detained him. Inside his backpack, a printout of my solar array, a pair of insulated gloves, and a set of bolt cutters. My stomach didn't just drop. It plummeted. He claimed he was just checking compliance for the HOA. The deputy was having none of it. "You're not the HOA, and even if you were, that's not how this works." Mark was arrested on the spot for trespass and possession of burglary tools. The next day, Mr. Davies filed the full counterclaims: civil harassment, invasion of privacy, and adding claims for damages. He was building a solid legal fortress around us. Act 3. Justice and reclamation. Fast forward a few weeks. The D&O insurance carrier was actively investigating. The HOA management company abruptly resigned, stating in their own minutes, which I was now reading, diligently, that they could no longer support the current board actions. The rats were indeed leaving the sinking ship. We subpoenaed the HOA for all communications. When the emails came in, I almost choked on my coffee. Messages from Victor to the board like, "We cannot allow that eyesore to set the tone. and if we annex his property into Phase 2 via amendments referencing the utility easement, he'll be forced to comply. We will do it informally first. One board member had actually replied, "We cannot annex land we don't own." Victor ignored him. Even more chilling, the metadata on the photo taken inside my barn showed it was taken by the neighbor who was arrested. Attached was a note to Victor. "Got pictures. He leaves the side door open sometimes." This was a coordinated criminal conspiracy. We gave it all to the detective. "This is escalation," the detective said. "We're going to talk to the district attorney." The final motion to dismiss hearing was a beatdown. The judge granted our motion with prejudice, meaning the HOA could never sue me again on those grounds. It felt incredible to hear. He set a separate hearing for sanctions and fees, and he extended the restraining order for 6 months. But the story wasn't over. A few days later, I got an anonymous letter in my mailbox. Block letters like a ransom note. "You think you won? Take the panels down," Sarah cried. We called the sheriff again. Mr. Davies then gave me the advice that cemented the pro-revenge. He leaned back in his chair and smiled. "Ethan," he said, "they keep insisting you are part of their HOA. It would be a shame if you didn't fully comply with their demands to participate in their governance, wouldn't it?" I frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Attend their meetings. Use their exact bylaws. Demand notices, meeting minutes, owner rosters. Use the rights they claim you have. And when they tell you that you're not actually a member when it inconveniences them, have that in writing." It was petty. It was also legal and brilliant. I sent a certified letter to the HOA as a homeowner in the community. "Per your lawsuit, I am exercising my rights under your bylaws to inspect all records, budgets, contracts, and minutes. Please provide access within the statutory time frame." I also demanded to be placed on the agenda for the next board meeting to discuss boundary signage and security concerns. They wrote back, "Only members can inspect records." I replied, "You sued me as Lot XYZ. Which is it?" They didn't answer, so I showed up at the next board meeting. I wore a dusty plaid shirt and my work boots because I had literally just come from the fields. Victor's face when he saw me walk in, priceless. During the member comments section, I raised my hand. Victor's neck turned bright red. "You're not a member," he hissed. I held up the copy of the complaint they had mailed to everyone as part of a ridiculous fundraising plea. I smiled sweetly. "Well, that's not what your lawsuit says, Victor." The murmuring in the room grew loud. A few people turned to look at him. I continued, speaking clearly to the room. "You told your residents that my property is part of your community, and that my barn is a violation. If that's true, I have the right to inspect your books. If it's not true, you owe all these wonderful people an explanation for spending their dues on a dead, frivolous lawsuit." Dead silence. Then a board member cleared her throat. "What exactly do you want, Mr. Miller?" "3 things, I said. 1, stop trespassing. 2, remove all references to my parcel from your materials. 3, tell your residents to leave my property alone." Then I paused, gave Victor my tightest smile, and added, "Oh, and number 4, if I'm a member per your claim, I nominate myself to the Architectural Review Committee." Someone snorted with laughter. Victor exploded, but it was too late. I used their own claim to force them to say the quiet part out loud. "He is not in the HOA." They shouted it in front of witnesses, and someone recorded it. After that, the treasurer reached out to me, genuinely stressed. He showed us invoices. Victor had been using the HOA's landscaper to do side jobs at his personal house at a discount, billing some of it as perimeter enhancements which included cut and quickly patched holes in my fence line. We had all the proof we needed. Mr. Davies filed a separate civil harassment lawsuit against Victor Sterling personally. We included the anonymous letter, the barn photos, the texts, the invoices, and the meeting video. The judge issued a temporary civil harassment restraining order, barring Victor from coming within 100 yards of me, my family, or my farm. A week later, the district attorney executed a search warrant at Victor's house. I know because someone in the subdivision filmed it. They carried out boxes of documents. That's where my sympathy evaporated. I felt bad seeing anyone get perp-walked in front of their neighbors. But then I remembered him telling me I'd find out they have standards, like he was the king of some self-appointed beige empire. Actions have consequences. In the civil case, the judge awarded me attorney's fees on the dismissed lawsuit and sanctioned the HOA for filing a frivolous suit. The HOA had to cut a check for a huge chunk of my defense costs. He wrote in the order that HOA overreach into non-member property rights is a serious matter, citing the state solar statute. The HOA imploded completely. The residents recalled the board. The new interim board actually reached out and apologized. We settled the counterclaims. The HOA paid the remainder of my legal fees, plus extra for my time and stress, and they agreed to install permanent, professional signage along the fence that read, "Private property, no HOA access." They also sent a cathartic letter to every single member, explaining they had no right to sue me. But the final victory came in the criminal trial. Victor refused to plead guilty, claiming it was civic duty. I testified, and Sarah testified about the fear the anonymous letter caused. The jury didn't take long. They convicted him on conspiracy and stalking. The judge sentenced him to a short stint in actual jail time, enough to wear the orange clothes, plus probation, restitution to me and the HOA for misused funds, and a long-term restraining order. He was permanently barred from serving on any HOA board in the county. Watching the bailiff lead him away, I felt a deep, profound mix of relief and justice. I wasn't happy, but I was satisfied. And remember how Victor said my solar array was an eyesore? Well, after the dust settled, the new HOA board came to me with an idea. Would I consider planting a native hedgerow along the fence line to soften the view? They offered to split the costs. I agreed, on the condition that they kept their people on their side of the new growth. I went one better. I filed a small application with the town to add a decorative, code-compliant privacy screen, a black wire panel anchored to my posts with vines that bloom and attract pollinators. The town loved it, the ultimate visual symbol that my farm, my rights, were here to stay, and they could even be beautiful. Oh, and because Victor had lied in court filings that my solar system was non-compliant with safety, my attorney filed a final complaint with the state licensing board against Victor's employer. He worked in home inspections, of course he did, for unethical conduct. The employer terminated him after the news coverage. I didn't set out to ruin his career. But if you're willing to lie in court about your neighbor's high-voltage electrical system, you probably shouldn't be inspecting houses for a living. My farm is back to normal now. The solar panels hum quietly. The goats still mostly ignore the fences, and best of all, Sarah is not tense every time a car slows down near the driveway. I still keep the cameras up because I'm not naive, but the neighborhood has been quiet. This whole ordeal changed me. It taught me that sometimes the most passive people become the fiercest fighters when their home and family are threatened. And it taught me that when entitlement meets legal due diligence, the law, thankfully, can still prevail. So I'm curious, guys, have you ever had an HOA, a neighbor, or some petty local bureaucracy try to exert power they absolutely didn't have over your life? Did you ignore them at first, or did you go nuclear right away? Did you fight back? Tell me about your own battles for property rights and common sense in the comments below. Let's talk about who really decides what's cohesive in our communities.